Sharpening. That mysterious thing that stands between me and happy hand tool woodworking. Well, contrary to popular belief, sharpening is not some mystical religion, nor is it some super skill possessed by only a few elite woodworkers. No, sharpening is a very basic skill, something that's well within the grasp of every hand tool woodworker. And cutting through all of the different angles and jigs and sharpening medium, there are two secrets. That's right, there are only two secrets to sharpening woodworking tools. And today I'm going to reveal those secrets to you. Secret number one is consistent angle. Now, whatever that angle is doesn't really matter. We could argue all day long about the best angle for this or that or the other thing, depending on the tool and the wood and the process that we're trying to do. But if we cannot maintain a consistent angle, the angle itself is irrelevant. So we're going to talk about, first off, some of the ways that we maintain a consistent angle in sharpening. When it comes to maintaining a consistent angle with a jig or fixture, the first tool that comes to mind is the 6-inch bench grinder. This is a super common tool. You can get these anywhere. They have a coarse wheel, a fine wheel, a work support. Often they'll have a work light. And this one has a nifty little water container to keep your edges cool. The work support is not terribly useful for sharpening woodworking tools, but is a great platform to build off of. This is an antique Craftsman bench grinder I got from the elderly gentleman I apprenticed with when I was a teenager. And he had taken a piece of angle iron and flat bar and riveted them to the factory work support to make this broad platform for sharpening chisels and plane irons. Here we have an old Stanley bench chisel that's seen better days. The edges are pretty crumbly. It's hit metal, I'm sure, and it needs really good sharpening. Notice that I move the tool across the stone so that the stone will wear evenly. I regularly dip the edge in the water to keep it from overheating. There we can see I'm getting a pretty good consistent grind. I need a little bit more on this side. And there we've ground it all the way across. Now that we have ground this tool on the bench grinder, we're ready to move on to a stone. And with the stone, right here, you'll see that I don't have any kind of jig, although there are some really nice honing guides for tools like chisels. They'll clamp onto your chisel, and there'll be a little set of wheels that ride on your stone to maintain that angle. Now for this sort of thing, I do it freehand, and I rely on my body mechanics and the fact that this was hollow ground on a stone as my guides. All right, so you'll notice that this is hollow. It will contact the stone here at the toe and at the heel, but this part is hollow from being ground on a round wheel. All right, so I'm going to bring this over to my stone. I'm going to lay it down with the heel, that's the back part, on the stone, and I'll raise it up until the toe contacts. And I can feel, all right, that's my angle. I maintain that angle. So I'm going to hold it with my fingers on each side, and then I'm going to tuck my elbows in and lock them at my sides. Okay? And now I'm going to move it forward and backward, maintaining that angle. You'll notice that I'm moving my entire body. I'm using body mechanics as my jig to maintain a consistent angle. Notice I'm cutting both on the push stroke and on the return stroke. These abrasives cut either way. Doesn't matter, you can cut pushing, pulling, or as I like to do, both. Now, we'll take a look at that, and you'll see that I've been removing metal here on the heel and just a little bit on the toe. I'm going to work on getting more on the toe. So I'll lean it forward just a little more. Again, my elbows tucked in at my sides. I'm moving my whole body. And I'm moving it across the stone to make even wear on the entire stone. There, you can see that I've got a little bit more out here on the toe. And I'm also favoring this one side more than this one, so I'm going to keep that in mind and go back to our stone. Put a little bit more pressure on this side that did not get as much material removed. There, much better. And now it's time for secret number 2. That is progressively finer grits. What I mean by that is when we start with the bench grinder, that's a pretty coarse stone. Even the fine stone on a bench grinder is not going to be finer than about 100 grit or maybe 120 grit, which is really, really coarse. And you only want to use that if you've got a lot of metal to remove. If you've got nicks and chips in your blade, and you've got to remove a lot of metal, a bench grinder does a great job. But from there, you need to go to a finer grit. What I have here is a 320 grit diamond stone. Now, this is called a coarse stone. In sharpening, 320 grit is pretty coarse. And you saw how I used body mechanics to maintain a consistent angle, and we went down to our 320 grit stone. The next step, we're going to go to a finer grit, and a finer grit, and a finer grit. And you want to progress systematically through those finer grits to get your very best edge. Now, you can skip some grits and go quicker, but to get the very, very finest edge, you'll want to use a grit progression that's very slow. So for this chisel, we want it to have a pretty fine edge. We're then going to go to another bench stone. And I've got an example right here of a typical man-made bench stone. It's got a coarse and a fine. Its coarse is going to be at least as coarse as this diamond, which we'll skip, and we'll go to the fine side. What I like to do here is lay this out with some non-skid material, put it on the bench, and then I'll do the same technique. I'll lay the heel down, pull it up to the toe, and then work my way back and forth, elbows tucked in at my side, rocking my whole body, minimizing movement. Now you can get a nice jig for doing this. They work quite well. I've found that they're not necessary. With practice, you can get a pretty good edge this way. Now, I've noticed that I am turning a burr. So when you sharpen one side, and you get down to what we call a zero edge, where the two planes actually meet, a little tiny bit of metal is going to fold over this way. And now we can remove that a couple of different ways. I can lay this down flat back like so. And now that's gone. Now we're ready to progress on to the next grit. And you'll notice that we spend less and less time on each of the grits. If we establish our bevel well and then work through the grits, we don't have to spend a lot of time on each one. This is a natural stone, an old razor stone, razor hone, and I find this to be a really nice stone to use next. I have a motley assortment of stones I've picked up at the flea markets and antique stores over the years. Nothing special, just a variety of different stones and different grits. Like I say, the secret is maintaining a consistent angle and using progressively finer grits. Now I can feel a burr right there again. Now I'll go to the back take that burr off and polish the back. Now we'll progress on to a finer razor hone yet. Again, I'm putting the heel of the bevel on the stone, raising it up to it contacts at the toe, holding it with my hands at that angle, and then rocking my body. I'm not putting a lot of pressure on this. As we progress into our finer grits, we can use less and less pressure. The grits in our sharpening media, they leave scratches. They're removing metal, and they leave scratches. The coarser grits leave deeper, bigger scratches, and the finer grits leave smaller, thinner scratches. And that's why it's important to progress evenly through our grits to effectively remove those scratches. Now, once we've gotten a good sharp edge with our finest stone, the very final thing to do is to use a strop. A strop is made out of leather. Some people use rough side out like I do. Some people use smooth side out. What's important is that the leather is fairly firm and is not squishy, because leather that's too soft and squishy is going to roll your edge over. Now, with your strop, we're not going to polish on the cutting or pushing stroke, because our sharp edge will cut into the leather. So what we're going to do is only strop on this back stroke. Like I say, a strop is just a piece of leather, often glued to a piece of wood as a backing, and then we've put some compound into it. There's a lot of different stropping compounds on the market. This is one I bought from Woodcraft many years ago, and it still lasted. What you'll do is take a knife, you'll shave off some of this compound, spread it on the leather, and then butter it in. The stropping compound is just a very fine, very mild abrasive. All right. So now we'll set that up. We'll take our chisel, lay the bevel on it, and just a little bit of pressure. You don't have to bear down on this. Just a little bit. Again, you want to maintain that angle. And then we'll turn it to the other side and remove that burr and polish the back side. And there, in just a few minutes, we went from a very dull chisel to a razor sharp chisel. Now, it's not a perfect edge. You'll notice I used a combination of a grinding fixture on the bench grinder, and then body mechanics and freehand work, but I maintained a reasonably consistent angle, and then progressed through my grits from coarse to fine to a strop. Another common sharpening tool that was marketed for woodworkers for many years, and still is the combination slow and fast grinder. This is another antique craftsman piece. It has a high-speed coarse grinding wheel with an adjustable work support, and then it has a slow-speed flat wheel that has both a coarse, which is rather a medium, and a fine stone, very flat. And I'm going to demonstrate the use of this tool on a plane iron to show you how we use our two key foundational concepts of sharpening: consistent angle and progressively finer grits with this one little machine. Even though this is an antique tool and this particular model is no longer made, there are several other similar high-speed, low-speed grinders on the market. Tormek from Sweden makes a very popular, rather expensive and elaborate model. Grizzly makes one, Delta makes one, and there's lots of antiques on the market if that's your sort of thing. There you can see our hollow ground surface all the way across. At this point, I'm going to take off this work support. This particular piece is missing the second work support for the flat stone on top, but this one works also. We just have to set it up differently. Now that I've got it honed on this medium side, I'll turn it over to the fine. And now that we've got it on a fine stone, we can go on to our strop. Now I noticed on this that there's a burr, again, from grinding and honing on the one side. So I'm going to go to my fine razor hone here. I'll take the burr off by holding it flat on the back side. And then I'm just going to set it here at my angle and gently polish that on this finer stone. And then to our finest stone, again, set the heel down, rock it up till the toe contacts, and relying on body mechanics, we're going to consistently hold this angle. And now we go to our strop. And now we have a razor sharp plane iron. Well, that's all well and good, you say, with a chisel or a plane iron or another straight blade, but what about a curved blade, like a gouge? Well, here we have a gouge. And yes, this can be a little bit of a challenge, particularly this long bent bowl gouge, where it won't sit exactly at one spot on your work rest on a grinder. Now, there are some fancier jigs and fixtures that go with the Tormex system or other grinders that allow you to clamp a gouge and sharpen it very effectively. But you can also do that and keep a consistent angle using body mechanics. So I want to demonstrate that on this long bent bowl gouge. Another great tool for sharpening is a Sharpie marker. What this does is allows me to see where I've sharpened and where I haven't. So I'm going to take this marker and I'm going to blacken the bevel. See that? I'm just going to blacken this whole bevel. And now we'll be able to see where we have sharpened. All right, so I'm going to come to my finer stone here. I've got it set on the non-skid on my workbench. This is a slightly convex edge, which is really good for a strong edge. It's really good for carving concave shapes like bowls. That's what this was designed for. It's a little bit of a challenge to sharpen since we don't have one particular flat, but we're going to find a spot right here where we want to be. And again, I'm going to hold it with my hands. I'm going to find that angle. And I'm going to lock my elbows into my body. And I'm going to start at one corner. And see how I roll that gouge from one side to the other. Doing my best to maintain, through body mechanics, this consistent angle, which is so important. All right, as you can see, I'm more toward the front edge, and that's fine to a degree. I'm going to do that until I feel a slight burr right now. So we've gone as far as we need to go with that stone. We'll then progress to our finer razor hone. And between grits, I can re-Sharpie just so I can see where I've been. Now, a danger with all sharpening, whether it's on a hollow ground chisel or whether it's a convex ground gouge, is to just sharpen that very front edge. That's the quickest way to get a sharp edge, is to sharpen just the very front. But what happens is, with about 2 or 3 sharpenings, it becomes very blunt and a much more severe angle, much thicker angle, and very soon it stops cutting. All right, we like just a little more here on this right-hand edge. There we have it. I can feel the burr. So now we can go to our strop. But you say, well, what about that inside? Yes, that's a great question. There's a couple different things. I have a gouge slipstone. This is made for stoning the inside or the outside of a smaller gouge. I find that this concave part's not terribly useful, but this section often is. But I also have a round strop on a dowel, and I'll use that for removing the burr. Again, I'm moving the leather away from the cutting edge. And again, I'm gripping it in both hands. My elbows are tucked against my body. And I'm rolling it along as I maintain that angle. What angle, you ask? What angle is that gouge sharpened to? Well, it doesn't really matter until you're consistent. So the main thing is to be able to produce a consistent angle, and then you can work on identifying the ideal angle for your tools and work. Our gouges are sharpened at an angle between 20 and 25 degrees. All right, there we go. Now we have a nice, very sharp, polished edge on that gouge. What about a tool like a draw knife? We use draw knives all the time, and they're a tremendously useful tool, but not an easy tool to sharpen. As you can imagine, putting this on a bench grinder, the handles are going to get in the way. And some folks, Pete Galbert's come up with a little jig to turn it sideways at an angle and grind on a bench grinder. That way works fairly well. If you have a belt grinder, that works quite well also, but you don't need either of those. There's another wonderful tool that I really like, and it is an axe stone, often referred to as a puck stone. It looks like a hockey puck. This is a large antique one, and it has a medium or coarse and then a fine side to it, and then a groove for you to grip. And the way this works, again, let me put some Sharpie mark. My poor Sharpie's about out of ink. And this doesn't need a lot of work, so I'm just going to go to the fine side. I will brace the handle against my chest. I will hold the other handle in my left hand and this puck stone in my right. I'll find the angle I want, and then I'll move this stone in a circular motion. My right arm is braced against my body. My wrist dials the angle in. And then it's just a matter of holding as still as I can. Like so. You can see I've gotten almost all the Sharpie mark off. And from there, I can feel I have a little bit of a burr in the back. But then I'll go to my finer stones. You can even use these small bench stones, just like that puck, by holding your work and moving your stone into it. Again, our keys, consistent angle. In this case, I'm relying purely on body mechanics and hand-eye coordination. And progressively finer grits. Now what happens when you skip grits? Maybe we go from our grinder all the way to a fine stone. Well, you'll leave some scratch marks. And depending on what your tool is, that may be just fine. Let's say you're sharpening a kindling splitting axe. You really don't need to have a polished finish on that. It's not that important. And now we'll go to our final finest razor hone. But if we're sharpening something like a dovetailing chisel, if we're sharpening a bowl carving gouge that's used for finishing a bowl, we want a very, very, very fine edge, and that's when you don't skip grits. You go progressively from your coarsest all the way down to your finest. Well, where do you start? You ask, where do I start? Which grit do I start with? And the answer there is you start with the finest grit that you can that gets the job done. You don't want to go to a grinder or a super coarse grit unless you really need to remove a lot of scratches. All right, so now we're going to go with our strop. Now, before you saw me set the strop here on the table, but again, the handles of this draw knife are going to get in the way. So I'm going to hold the draw knife and move the strop away from the cutting edge. Now I can do just like this, or sometimes I will put one handle down on the bench on this non-skid, hold the other, and then again, notice my left elbow is locked against my body, my right elbow is locked against my body, and this gives me a lot of rigidity and the ability to maintain that consistent angle, which is so vital for any kind of sharpening. Now, a lot of folks like to use a buffing wheel, a cloth buffing wheel on a grinder for this final bit instead of a leather strop. I have a buffing wheel. I use it sharpening our tools. I really like it. It's very effective. It's a little more dangerous than a strop, and it will damage your tools very quickly and hurt you if you're not using it correctly. So there's a skill involved in using a strop, but it can be there's a lot of skill involved in using a buffing wheel, but it is a very effective polishing tool to get that final edge on your tool. And now we have, yes, a very nice, clean, razor sharp edge on our draw knife. You saw that didn't take very long to get. The two secrets for sharpening are consistent angle and progressively finer grits. Oh, there's actually a third secret for sharpening, and that secret is diligence. People ask me all the time, which is the best sharpening method? Is it the scary sharp method? Is it using Japanese water stones? Which method is the best? And I have one simple answer. That is, the best sharpening method is the one that you use regularly. Go out and make sharpening a part of your regular everyday life in woodworking, and you'll be glad that you did. For more information on sharpening, stay tuned to our YouTube video where we go through the sharpening process for all of the tools that we make. For further reading, I highly recommend the book Sharpen This by Christopher Schwarz, published by Lost Art Press. This book's available as a free PDF download as well as a high-quality hardbound book that really demystifies sharpening and puts it within the realm of all woodworkers.